He's the former president and publisher of the Sun Herald, and now he's on the radio. Welcome to Coast Vue with Ricky Mathews on SuperTalk Mississippi Gulf Coast 103.1.
Welcome to Coast Vue, the show that celebrates the men and women who are making coastal Mississippi a better place to live, work, and play. Hey, you might have seen Matthew McConaughey recently urging Americans not to treat the pandemic as a partisan political issue. He said that in the beginning we were all united, and I think all of us saw that we all came together around what we call this common enemy, the virus. But then he noticed, and I'm sure you did, I certainly did, notice that this kind of partisan divide began to develop. So he launched a PSA effort, a public service announcement effort, that was focused on, not on politics, but what he says, focused on us. He says we have to be together, that this is a human thing and that we shouldn't be divided, that we don't need two wars. We already have one. The virus is the war that we should be fighting. I want to applaud Matthew McConaughey and his efforts. We need to restore that unified spirit across America, and especially here in coastal Mississippi. That's what got us through Katrina. It's what's going to get us through the situation we're in now. As I said so many times before, resiliency is in our DNA. And as we begin to open up tourism and the casinos, it has never been more important for us to have our visitors see in us a community that gets it, that it's critical that we be seen as a safe place to visit. It's going to be, as we've said so many times on this show, our competitive advantage as we go forward for the next several months. So the message must be clear. Coastal Mississippi is a safe place to visit. Be a part of that effort and help us get unified. We've got a great show today. John Hairston is the CEO from Hancock Whitney. He's visited here on Coast Vue a couple of times. Last time we talked was about 6 weeks ago. And then we have Brandy Westman, who's a nurse from Ocean Springs, who's actually working in the COVID hospital in New York. What a great story that's going to be. She's literally a hero. I can't wait to have the conversation with Brandy. So let me turn to my friend John. How are you doing, buddy?
Hey, good to see you, Ricky. Hope all is well with your family.
Everybody's doing well, and same to you, man.
Thank you.
You know, look, it's been 6 weeks. A lot has happened in the past 6 weeks. So how have you been?
Yeah, it's good. It's been really busy. Obviously the world is a different place than it was 6 weeks ago. And if you remember, when we were together last time, we were sort of wondering what the next month or two was going to be like. Well, now we know. Unfortunately, we've still got all the same questions. How long will it last? What is normal going to be? Will our previous lives ever really come back and be the same way that they were before? So we've got some answers, but even more questions.
Yeah, I've often referred to this as sort of a hurricane, that now the eye is sitting on top of us and we're trying to gather resources, but we don't really yet know what's on the other side of this. And it could go on for a long time. As Dr. Conger, an infectious disease doctor from Memorial, said, that we'll either build herd immunity or we'll get a vaccine. And certainly as we begin to open up the economy, whether we realize it or not, we're actually working our way towards some kind of herd immunity. But that's just the kind of reality we're in these days.
It takes time, certainly, but just like after the hurricane, since you invoked the H word, and here we are, facing hurricane season. I think I've heard you say before, years ago in your previous life and on your show, that resilience is in the coastal DNA, and we're seeing it again. Our healthcare community really did a terrific job standing in the gap in the early days when we really had no idea what the right treatment regimen was. And they, while, every industry comes together in times of need and all the competitiveness begins to ease away. So our healthcare organizations, both clinical, research, and hospital, all shared dramatically good information. They learned what worked better and what didn't work as well. And today, their ability to treat more severe cases is really pretty good. The number of days in hospital came down, number of days in ICUs coming down, number of days on a vent, if they have to go on a vent at all, is coming down. So our resources aren't getting tested as badly per infectious case as we were looking at back in the middle and late, really through middle of April. So a lot of good work there.
Yeah, I've had hospital administrators from across the coast on the show, and Kent Nico said it best, that their early efforts to get the sort of drive-through testing done, and they're not, they've been looking for the disease, but they're positive tests versus the total number of tests that they do is remained pretty low. So we've been pretty lucky in coastal Mississippi. We've had our pockets, of course, and we could have pockets again. And I think that's the thing that probably worries me the most, that people think that this is sort of like a light switch we can kind of start to ease back into our lives, and we don't necessarily have to be careful anymore. It's more like a volume control, isn't it, John? That we've got to carefully turn it back up again and remain very vigilant in our efforts to be safe. And if we do that, we have a real opportunity here to restart the economy in ways that we maybe didn't envision, say, a month ago.
You're exactly right. And, nobody likes to be told what to do. We live in a country that enjoys its individual freedoms. And when people begin to step on the toes of our choices, then, the reaction sometimes is negative. But there are a few guiding principles that make a lot of sense. And just, our own one organization, which is one of many on the Gulf South and in Mississippi and on the coast, having to evaluate how do you protect your team members, how do you protect your clients as necessary reopening occurs, is what we spend the bulk of our time in the management forums talking about. And so I think since the show we were together last time, the company announced spending $2.5 million to feed people and do some other things, but we've never bought PPE before as a company for the communities. But what we discovered was, sometimes we see people not wearing masks at the grocery store or whatever, and you kind of chide them for, gee, I wish everybody would wear a mask, but not everybody has access to one. Not everybody, not everybody has transportation to go get one. And so starting next week, we'll be distributing the first tranche of somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million masks across our footprint through neighborhood organizations and other areas that we feel like will help everybody have access to a mask. And so that's not a marketing stunt. It's just something we believe helps protect the economy, right? I think it's good for people's safety, and it's good for protecting the economy as things reopen, because whether people are afraid or not, if we don't reopen, we put people at risk. If we do reopen and behave irresponsibly, we put people at risk. So what's the common thread? We got to make good decisions as we reopen. And that means masking in public. Look, I know it's uncomfortable. It's going to be more uncomfortable in August, right, when it gets hot. But the right answer is to protect yourself and the people you care about and the people you don't know, but you still ought to care about. The right answer is keep your hands clean, don't touch your face, wear a mask when you're outside of your element where you're private.
So I really applaud your efforts on getting the PPEs out to the general public. I was at I won't name the store. I was at a marine store this past weekend. There were over 20 people in the store. I was the only one in the store with a face mask on. So, I think what that will do is just kind of serve as a great reminder for people that, take one and wear it. And, this is real. And it's not going to go away until we get a vaccine. And that's just kind of the reality of the situation. And what I've tried to urge people to think about, while we have had pockets of outbreaks here in coastal Mississippi, all it's going to take is one of the right kind of outbreak here somewhere along coastal Mississippi, and it's going to set us back. And we don't need to get set back in our efforts to reopen the economy. That can't be overstated, can it?
It can't. And it's so preventable, right? I mean, a mass outbreak is 100% preventable if people just take the time to be careful. I said before when I opened that ball in this call, nobody likes to be told what to do. So this is not like preaching to somebody, but I mean, you have healthcare professionals in your family. I do too. And I think when you hear the stories where they're talking about how people get infected and how it could be prevented, and the fact that well over 90% of the cases that we know about have been traced back to social interaction, just being around people. And if you're going to be nobody wants to be cut off from the people they care about. And so, but if you mask when you're in public, we'll see the infection rate, I think, but maintain manageability.
So in the second segment that we're going to be together today, I want to get into the restart efforts and getting the casinos open and all that. But just before we move off of Hancock Whitney, you guys were really focused on your digital platforms and beginning to understand that people, the remote access to the bank and using their phones and iPads as opposed to going into the brick and mortar banks has really taken off, hasn't it?
It has. We didn't see the pandemic coming, but we did invest. I won't tell you how many millions, but a bunch of millions into enhancing the digital platforms. And thank goodness that we did. And not just digital platforms, but also the ability of our team members to get work done from away from the office, because they got to be in the face of our clients versus sitting
Right.
in a remote office. And so it's been very helpful to see them and that technology bear some fruit during this time.
It's been amazing to see how business has changed for so many different sectors.
It sure has.
Telemedicine, hear the hospital administrators talk about how telemedicine has taken off. It's just incredible. And then you think about education and the use of Zoom and what's happening there, just incredible. So anyway, we're going to go to break, and we'll be back with John Hairston, the CEO of Hancock Whitney, after this, and we'll talk about the restart effort.
Follow SuperTalk Mississippi Gulf Coast 103.1 on Facebook. Facebook.com/SuperTalk MS Coast 103.1.
Talking to the people that help make the coast such a unique place to live. This is Coast View with Ricky Mathews on SuperTalk Mississippi Gulf Coast 103.1.
Welcome back to Coast View. We've got CEO of Hancock Whitney, John Hairston, with us. And coming up in the second segment is Brandy Westman, who's a nurse in New York from Ocean Springs. Can't wait for that conversation. The nurses are heroes, aren't they, John?
They are indeed. They've been standing in the gap now for for 3 months. We only really paid attention for 5 or 6 weeks, but they were preparing for this really before it ever got on shore in the U.S.
It's so cool to watch their work come into focus. They've always been there. They've always been heroes. But now, because of the coronavirus situation, we get a chance to kind of freeze frame them in the moment and see the amazing work they're doing. So I look forward to having that conversation with Brandy coming up. So John, when we left, we were talking about digital platforms for Hancock Whitney and all that, and the work that you're doing to keep your employees and your customers safe as you begin to kind of think about how do you reopen and what does life look like for you in the new world. Well, every business is undergoing that sort of examination. I was so pleased when I saw that you were going to be on the executive committee for the Restart Mississippi effort that the governor launched, and then we've got Anthony Wilson involved in a major committee. We've got William Yates involved and others like Robert St. John's, and the list goes on and on. But what's your read on how things are going as it relates to zeroing in on how the governor begins to turn the volume back on up on the economy and start to work through the phases?
Well, it's been an interesting exercise and somewhat deja vu to Katrina, where everything was one way on Friday, and then on Monday it was a very different world. And while this took a month or two to develop into the economic impact the pandemic's had, that's still pretty fast, right? And so as the commission has gotten legs underneath it, and I think generally, we know what we are and what we're not. And one of the big misnomers, Ricky, is when it was first formed, is there was this thought that the commission was going to decide how to spend the money. This is an advisory board. There is no methodology for that group to really decide anything other than being the voice of the people of the state, the voice of the communities, the counties, the cities, the regions, and the voice of employers to give input to the governor. And ultimately, he's got to take that, massage what he thinks is good counsel and not something he believes in. It could be one of both. And we all know our feelings aren't going to get hurt if he whether he agrees or disagrees. We're there to give him counsel. He takes that information and working in partnership with the legislature and the various agency heads, makes decisions about what to do. And where he has us targeted right now, we have a weekly meeting, the whole commission, that's both the committee heads and the executive team. And we start with what's changed in a week. And that's gotten down to a pretty tight, just a few minutes about what's changed. Early on, it was big changes. Now it's small adjustments. And then we have a separate meeting every week that he has us focus on workforce development. And so one of the more encouraging things that we're seeing is the governor's team has now been able to shift time. There for a while it was just getting ahead of this dragon, right? And now those efforts have been bifurcated between dealing with the pandemic and the health risk and reopening in a safer environment. And then secondly, where's the silver lining in this? How do we make lemonade out of these lemons that the virus has given us? And one of the areas that he notably, and he came up with this, I've given credit, it wasn't us. He was the one that thought of the idea, is we have long since suffered relative to our neighboring states in the Gulf South in job growth and higher, I call it middle income and maybe a little better roles. So we're really good at labor. As you've seen here on the coast, we were dynamite at tourism. And as we made investments in tourism, I mean, if you didn't have a job on the coast, it was probably because you weren't working hard to get one. There were plenty of opportunities to work. The problem was a lot of those jobs were in tourism. And in the aftermath of the Deepwater Horizon issue, and we had funds and still have funds available to deploy, there was a feverish desire to deploy those funds in a way that created those better paying jobs so we weren't so dependent on hospitality. Sadly, we ran out of time. We're in the middle of exactly the scenario that we all worried about, is that some event, we all thought it'd be a storm. We didn't think it'd be a virus. But here we are staring at between a 20 and a 25% unemployment rate on the coast. It didn't get that high in the month after Katrina. And so this is the worst unemployment rate we're headed into since the Depression. And so thankfully, there are channels of funding available that help us change that and maybe de-risk while we move along. And so the governor's interest is in covering that gap that we have with other Gulf South states, but first through workforce development, and then through engineering changes in the way that we bring businesses and opportunities for our citizens to work into the state, and coupling workforce development of a very good high school system and a very good community college system into putting people into jobs that have a career path that allow them to stay in Mississippi.
Yeah.
So he's looking at this differently than we did after Deepwater Horizon and after Katrina and after Camille, where it was just kind of put out the fire. And he wants to put investments into things that stay on and stay vigorous and stay valuable and accountable and have it institutionalized the state going forward. That's a different approach than we've taken in the past.
It's good to hear, particularly as it relates to the BP money. It's for a conversation that we can have at a later time. But what it's going to do then is create a recalibration of thinking around how that money might be deployed. I know a lot of the thinking was very much around, long-term payback. Much of the kind of stuff that you're talking about. But maybe we can even create more alignment around that goal now as a result of thinking that way. Yeah. I'm sure that will happen.
And again, I know I'm looking for silver linings here. I would rather not have the dark cloud, but we've got it, right? And so how do we find the lining? It was unfortunate, but you mentioned at the start of the show the need to leave politics out of all this, and you're 100% right. This is about helping people and helping people equitably, and making sure we help the people that need the help the most, right? And regardless of who they voted for. And why they voted for them doesn't matter anymore. It's about making something good happen for our state and our economy. And as we go through this next few months, making sure that we can move quickly, but also invest things prudently. We're probably going to have to make some bets and take some courageous decisions. And if 8 out of 10 works out, we're way ahead of the game. But we may have to suffer through the 2 that just don't pan out in order to get the aid. And so I think being able to move quickly is part of what will help the most.
It's good to hear, though. I mean, I sort of saw this, but to hear it articulated now, that the Restart Committee was not just looking at specific industries and how they might begin to work their way through the phases, but there was also a strategic focus attached to the area, as you referred to, as sort of a bifurcation of the effort. So a lot we could talk about there, but I want to get to the casinos. As they begin to think, I've had Larry Gregory on, Al Hopkins on, I've had just a wide range of local leaders there, Craig Ray last week, long list of people who are incredibly aligned around how the casinos need to begin to think about opening up. and the importance of sending the message that they are a safe place to visit. It's going to be different. It's going to be a totally different experience, but people can go there knowing that they feel that they can be safe. What do you want to say about the casinos?
Well, first of all, they are a very important part of Mississippi's economy. They are an even more demonstrable important part of the coastal and the river education community.
Yes.
I mean, if you drive through these shiny new facilities we have for schools on the Gulf Coast and public education, like it or not, they were in part and maybe a big part built by gaming revenue. And so, so if we don't have that revenue, then it's the moral equivalent of a house that never gets painted, right? And so we need them restarted for the benefit of our kids and economic growth going forward. But in terms of opening, what's unique about the gaming community is that will be the first of what's considered a large venue. If you go through the White House Reopening America plan, they separated. Healthcare was first, and then you worked your way through businesses from essential businesses, and the last to open were large venues. And so, unfortunately for gaming, they get lumped in with football games. Right. Yes. Where, football games are a little bit more optional. I'm a football person, so maybe they're not so optional for me to be happy. But for gaming, they're lumped in there. And so the Gaming Commission and the governor's team and the health department and the gaming community themselves are having to work through how do we open the first of Mississippi's large venues safely and do so in a way that the situation is worse than it is today. And they've come up with some really neat ideas of how to start. And so now the governor hadn't had the first conversation with me about reopening gaming. That's not how he has our group tasked. I'm sure he's having that with other committees, particularly Robert St. John's committee, which has hospitality responsibility. But when I'm reading the tea leaves, it seems to be that he used the opening of restaurants and other venues where people are a little bit closer together to see how that worked. Yeah. What did we learn? Yeah. What was a good idea or a bad idea? And then with the benefit of all those ideas, work through the Gaming Commission and the gaming operators to come up with a good way to start. So I'd have to say that's a pretty smart way to approach it, but I think we're all anxious to go to the next phase.
I know we are. So, John, listen, we're running out of time. I just want to tell you thank you. We'll be back to you in a couple of weeks to check in. You've been a consummate friend to me and the Coast Vue show and to the people of coastal Mississippi and the region, and we look forward to talking to you again. Thank you very much for your leadership.
Thank you. And, Ricky, one thing you might want to concentrate on in a future show was a development yesterday where the governor talked about the unemployment benefits being at risk for people who get an offer to return to work and opt not to take it, to remain on unemployment, and can suddenly get cut off, and the job is gone. And that's a development that maybe your show could address in the future.
We'll definitely do that, man. Thank you very much. We'll have Brandy.
Thanks for what you're doing. Thanks, and please make sure the next guest, who I know is a Mississippi nurse working in New York, please pass my thanks on to her and as an ambassador of our hospitality to places that are in need. Take care.
You bet, buddy. Thank you.
See you, man. Bye-bye.
Subscribe for free to the Coast Vue podcast on iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.